Oh, hello. Come in, have a seat. Gosh. Short sleeves today. It's been an amazing, in fact I think it's been the hottest day of the year so far. So it's actually quite nice to be in the cool of the study. We don't need to get up and go to any shelves today. I've literally just pulled this off the shelf here. I think I mentioned to you that the books that happen to be to hand, I mean, I've got a Bible and one or two other essential things, but essentially all these bookcases here are Chesterton and Hilaire Belloc, who were so closely associated at one point in their writing and their general stance, their anti-imperial stance, their stance against what was going on with the making of the British Empire, and many other things. They were associated together, and they were referred to sometimes just by one word. In the popular press, they're referred to as the Chester Belloc. Both vivacious, pugnacious, brilliant men of letters. Both in a sense slightly sort of odd eccentric characters within their time, very much swimming against the flow of the modernist culture around them. Brilliant in their different ways. Chesterton, I think, in the end a more sympathetic and more developed theologian, and somebody who's lasting longer in all his writings. But Belloc survives now really only through his comic verse. I mean, one of his little he wrote wonderful comic epigrams, and one of which, of course, famously was, "When I am dead, I hope it may be said, his sins were scarlet, but his books were red." And I read a lot of his books, but nowadays people mostly just remember him for his comic verses for children, The Bad Child's Book of Beasts and that kind of thing, which are almost parodies of the sort of Victorian morally improving books with moral tales for children, which he took and just exaggerated. So there's a wonderful collection of them, which you may know, where children come to terrible grisly ends for not obeying their parents in simple matters. Matilda told such dreadful lies, and then she ends up in a house on fire, or the chief defect of Henry King was chewing little bits of string and he ends up tied up into knots. Belloc actually went on to do the same for adults, and he had a wonderful book of the peers of the realm coming to a bad end, one of which my father always used to quote. My father was he was an academic. He was a modest means, I mean, not in a classic sense a wealthy man, but he used to quote this wonderful one of Belloc's, because my father was as impractical as I am. We always had to employ people to do the most simple do-it-yourself handiwork, and sometimes that was quite expensive. And my father, paying the bill, would say, he'd sometimes quote the whole poem, which was goes, "Lord Lucan tried to mend the electric light himself, and died, and serve him right. It is the business of the wealthy man to give employment to the artisan." And my father often quoted that. So he's remembered for those things, and the little verses he wrote on sundials, like, "I am a sundial, and I make a botch of what is done much better by a watch." However, I'm sure that's not what he wanted to be remembered for. He wanted to be remembered for his more serious poetry, and also for his wonderful prose. He wrote history books, and he wrote collections of essays. And this here, Hills in the Sea, is a very fine edition of one of his collections of essays, which I've been rereading because two things you can't go without: Hills and the Sea, neither of which I have anywhere near me in Cambridgeshire, which is about as flat and landlocked as it's possible to get. Look at that beautiful picture of a drove over the downs. This, as you see, this tells you the first edition, first published, Crown Octavo, 1906. Now, I bought this, which actually was printed in 1927, simply because it has such beautiful illustrations and is so beautifully presented. Though the very fact that, look at all those, I mean, he's no longer remembered for his prose at all, but look at all that continuous right through the Great War, right on beyond, right into the 20s. Everybody wanted to read these beautiful essays. In fact, I have, just to show you the difference, as it happens, I possess a first edition of this same book. That's how it looked when it came out. It had a rather nicer spine, but it was, there it is, first edition. It was very plainly presented. It had no illustrations. And its titles of the essays, wonderful. You know, The Mowing of a Field, that's a classic. An essay on Lynn, an essay on The Man in His Wood, a marvellous essay on the North Sea. Belloc had a little boat called the Nona. He wrote a book called The Cruise of the Nona. And he writes beautifully about that. And actually the item I wanted to read to you, because I've been reading it myself, is a superb essay called The Slant Off The Land. Here it is, page 168, which has, I think, one of the finest accounts of England, really. You know, if I were to point, my patriotism, such as it is, isn't politically rooted at all. And in fact, I dislike Belloc's politics a lot, but I still admire him as an essayist. My patriotism is very much rooted in the particularities of the land and the landscape. The way Belloc moves from the particular to the universal, the way he gives you little, almost epigrams about life and time and being in the midst of the tiniest and most particular observations of one place rather than another. I think as an account of England, and of course it's England as we realise in a minute, it starts minutely looking at something and then sort of the camera pans back, as it were, and you realise he's in his little boat off the coast and appreciating the country just off its limits. Let me just read you the opening of The Slant Off The Land. If you want to know about a really perfectly crafted English prose style, then you can't go wrong with Belloc. The Slant Off The Land. We live a very little time. Before we have reached the middle of our time, perhaps, but not long before, we discover the magnitude of our inheritance. Consider England. How many men, I should like to know, have discovered before 30 what treasures they may work in her air? She magnifies us inwards and outwards. Her fields can lead the mind down towards the subtle beginning of things, the tiny iridescence of insects, the play of light upon the facets of a blade of grass. Her skies can lead the mind up infinitely into regions where it seems to expand and fill no matter what, immensities. The movement from the particularity to the immensities is wonderful. And then he goes on to say, that's the first paragraph, and then it suddenly switches perspective. It was the wind off the land that made me think of all this possession in which I am to enjoy so short a usufruct. I sat in my boat, holding that tiller of mine, which is not over firm, but is but a rough bar of iron. There was no breeze in the air, and the little deep vessel swung lightly to the breathing of the sea. Her great mainsail and her balloon jib came over lazily as she swung, and filled themselves with the cheating semblance of a wind. The boom creaked in the gooseneck, and at every roll the slack of the main sheet tautened with a kind of little thud which thrilled the deck behind me. Just extraordinary writing. You're completely there on the boat, the sights, the sounds, and yet these little things, the shortness of time, this possession of which I am to enjoy so short a usufruct. I mean, it's extraordinary Latinate English. He puts these odd words in that you wouldn't expect. And I'm taking this book up again simply because, like Chesterton and Belloc before me, I find that I too am having to master the art of the short familiar essay, and like them I have a hard taskmaster, and every Friday I must hand in the essay, which will be published the following Friday in the Church Times, and I like to write it on a Thursday and then sleep on it. And I finished writing mine this morning, but I like to refresh my mind with what at least the possibilities of a short English essay might be by reading one of these two great masters. So that's what you find me doing. Happily, most of Belloc is also on the web and that sort of thing, so it's very good. And I'm keeping myself going with coffee. Thank you for the coffee, by the way, and good to see you.